My name is Steve. I'm 22 years old and I live in the Midwest United States. And I decided to make a video log starting now because in just a little over a week I'm going to be having open heart surgery. So I'm going to explain why. But first, I'm going to make a few entries before the procedure, just to introduce myself, to kind of clarify my situation, and then I'm going to make one entry the night before or the day before, because before the procedure I'm going to have some tests done that day. And then I probably won't make any entries in the hospital, but afterwards I'll come back and I'll just start day by day or week by week, whatever, describing how the recovery process is going, what it was like being in the hospital, that sort of thing. So, why do I need heart surgery at 22 years old? Well, I was born with a defect known as Tetralogy of Fallot, and it was corrected surgically when I was very young, about 2 months old. And it went like this. Basically, my parents didn't really notice anything wrong with me, except my mom claims that every once in a while I would just become quiet and pale. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it. But during a routine exam by my general physician, after about 2 months, he heard something wrong in my heart. He said that my fingers were starting to look cyanotic blue and also a little clubbed. As you can see, they're fine now. They have been as long as I can remember. But because I don't have Tetralogy of Fallot, I now have corrected Tetralogy of Fallot. And there's a difference, because tetralogy has a pretty dismal survival rate, if not corrected. But correcting it is now, and was when I was born, a routine operation, and has a pretty good survival rate. So my doctor noticed these things. I was sent to the hospital, and they diagnosed me with Tetralogy of Fallot. And from then on, I couldn't leave the hospital. They kept me there for about a week, doing tests, such as an angiogram. And after that time, they did the surgical correction. And after that, I was in the hospital, in the ICU about 5 days, in the hospital about 5 days longer. So overall, maybe like 3 weeks. Obviously, I don't remember any of this. This is all just from hearing it from my parents. So, now that I've explained how that happened, let's actually explain what tetralogy is. I'll start out by explaining, just very basically, the anatomy of the heart. So there are 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. The ventricles are the main pumping chambers of the heart, pumping from the right side to the lungs, from the left side to the rest of the body. The atria are secondary. They provide about 20% of the pressure that goes throughout the body. And there are 4 valves, 2 between the atria and the ventricles, and 2 between the ventricles and their target. So, I like to think about it, where is the blood going? The blood comes in from the body, all blue, into the vena cava. After the right atrium, it passes through the tricuspid valve, goes into the right ventricle, passes through the pulmonic valve, into the pulmonary veins, into the lungs, the capillaries of the lungs, the pulmonary arteries, then into the left atrium. And from there, it passes through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle, and From there it passes through the aortic valve, into the aorta, into the rest of the body. The heart has two strokes. The two atria contract together, then the two ventricles contract together. You might be familiar with the heart sound, boom. That actually doesn't happen when the atria are contracting and then the ventricles are contracting like you might think. It's not boom. It actually happens when the valves are closing, which is during and after the ventricle contraction. So it's more like boom. Because at that time, the blood is pushing first from the ventricle back up at the atrium, and then back up into the ventricle. So let's explain what tetralogy of flow is. It's called tetralogy because there are four separate defects identified. The first is a septal defect, that is, it's a hole between the two ventricles, right at the top of the ventricles. And this allows for oxygenated blood to mingle with unoxygenated blood, and you lose your oxygen that's supposed to go to the rest of the body. You lose it to the blood going into the lungs, and that's what causes the cyanosis, or the bluing, the blue baby effect. The second two defects have to do with the valves that lead from the ventricles outward. You have an overriding aorta, it's called, which is just the aortic valve is larger and it extends through that septal defect into the right ventricle. It's supposed to just be in the left ventricle. Secondly, contrary to that, the other side of the coin, so to speak, you have a thin or stenotic valve leading from the right ventricle. Your pulmonic valve is stenotic, barely anything can get through. And lastly, you have hypertrophy of the right ventricle, and that just means the enlargement of the muscle fibers themselves, and that compensates for the difficulty of the blood getting through that stenotic pulmonic valve. And so when they do the correction, the surgical correction, they basically just patch up the holes and they open up the way to the lungs. And opening up the way to the lungs destroys the pulmonic valve, if you can ever really say that it wasn't destroyed already. So, that leaves people who've had this correctional procedure with the need for a new pulmonic valve. They usually get it when they've reached adulthood, sometimes a little bit beforehand, because it's known that if you get it earlier in life, you're more likely to have this right ventricular hypertrophy that results from the loss of that valve. First it's caused by the stenosis, then it's caused by the loss of the valve. That's more likely to go away. So, right now, I have no valve there, basically. I have regurgitation, and a significant amount of it. Basically, when the right ventricle opens up again, it sucks back the blood from the lungs. And this causes it some difficulty in getting the blood through the heart. It's not really fatal, but it becomes, I think, more of a quality of life issue as I would get older, and it would start to influence me more. So, I think that's how I'll end this one, and see you next video.